In the darkest corners of the Imperium, where shadows clung to secrets like a shroud, Inquisitor Adela Ravenna pursued the whispers of heresy that slithered through the halls of power. The heart of the Imperial Inquisition was a labyrinth of deceit, and Ravenna's unyielding gaze sought to expose the dark secrets that festered within. Assigned to investigate the high-ranking echelons of the Administratum, Ravenna delved into the labyrinthine archives of the hive world Secundus Siderax. The air within the dimly lit halls was heavy with the scent of ancient parchment and the distant hum of machinery. The vastness of the records mirrored the sprawl of the hive, a city that reached into the heavens, its foundations lost in the abyss below. As Ravenna pored over the dusty tomes, she discovered a pattern, a thread of corruption that wove through the highest levels of bureaucracy. Whispers of forbidden pacts and clandestine dealings reached her ears. The very foundations of the Imperium seemed tainted, and the Inquisitor's pursuit intensified. The deeper Ravenna dug into the archives, the more the air seemed to weigh upon her. The scent of ink and decay blended into something more sinister, an almost metallic tang that she had only ever associated with blood and old machine oil. The flickering lumen strips cast uneven pools of light along the towering stacks of records, and for a moment she could have sworn that the shadows shifted when she wasn't looking. The trail led her to a secluded chamber deep within the Administratum's archives. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the towering shelves of forbidden knowledge. Ravenna, accompanied only by her ever-loyal acolyte, entered the dimly lit chamber, her silhouette a fleeting specter against the towering stacks of parchment.
"Do you feel it, Inquisitor?"
The acolyte whispered, his voice barely audible.
"This place, it's alive with secrets."
"And lies,"
Ravenna replied coldly.
"Lies that have thrived in the dark for far too long."
A sudden creak echoed through the chamber, the sound of something heavy shifting in the dark. Ravenna froze, her fingers brushing the grip of her bolt pistol. The acolyte tensed beside her, his eyes darting toward the towering shelves. The silence that followed was oppressive, but the Inquisitor did not waver. Whatever presence lurked here, be it a trick of the mind or something far worse, she would face it with steel and resolve. In the center of the room stood a lectern adorned with an ancient grimoire, its pages bound in flesh and inked with the blood of the heretical. Ravenna, driven by an unquenchable thirst for truth, opened the tome. As she deciphered the blasphemous text, a chill gripped her heart. The secrets within the grimoire unveiled a hidden cabal within the highest ranks of the Administratum, a shadowy assembly that had struck unholy bargains to maintain the Imperium's veneer of order. The names of revered figures were stained with treachery, and the very bureaucracy meant to safeguard humanity had succumbed to the tendrils of the warp. A whisper echoed in the chamber, a disembodied voice that seemed to resonate from the very pages of the grimoire.
"Inquisitor Ravenna, you tread on paths darker than you can fathom,"
it murmured. The whisper did not fade. It lingered in the stagnant air, growing fainter but never truly vanishing. As Ravenna turned the pages of the grimoire, her auspex flickered, briefly detecting an energy fluctuation, then going dead. For a moment, she wondered if the corruption she sought had already begun to infect the very walls around her. The Administratum was a rotting beast, its arteries clogged with lies and decay. Was it possible that some malign force had been feeding on that corruption all along? Unfazed, Ravenna continued her quest. Her investigation led her to the underbelly of Secundus Siderax, where the destitute and forgotten languished in squalor. Beneath the hive's towering spires, she discovered a clandestine cult that worshipped the warp in the shadows, their rituals obscured by the perpetual gloom.
"How deep does this corruption run?"
The acolyte muttered, glancing nervously at the flickering lights above them.
"Deep enough to touch the stars,"
Ravenna replied.
"We are but the scalpel. The cancer has spread across the body of the Imperium."
The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, dancing on the walls distorted by the smoke of a ritual. And there they were, the cultists. They had surrounded the altar, immersed in a deep trance, their faces obscured by hoods and makeshift masks. Every movement they made seemed to be guided by an invisible force, as if the room itself were breathing along with them. A palpable tension filled the air, as if time itself were bending under the weight of the ritual. A gust of warm, rancid air passed through the chamber, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of burnt flesh and something older, something unnatural. The flickering lights above dimmed for the briefest moment, and in that instant, Ravenna thought she saw something beyond the cultists, a shape barely visible, as if reality itself was thinning. It loomed behind the altar, a presence that had no true form yet was impossibly vast. The altar, placed at the center of the room, was covered in mystical objects and obscene symbols, each of them burning with a malevolent intensity. The sound of their chants mixed with the beat of drums, creating an infernal symphony that seemed to merge with the very heartbeat of Secundus Sidorax. The cultists, dressed in tattered rags, recoiled at the intrusion of the Inquisitor and her acolyte, but they did not stop. In the room, they chanted in a forbidden tongue, their bodies moving in rhythmic motions as if possessed by a force greater than themselves. The sound was deep and shrill, a melody that seemed to warp reality itself, pulling the mind toward the precipice of madness. The air thickened with malevolence as warp energies coalesced, twisting reality itself. Nightmarish entities materialized, their forms shifting between dimensions. The cultists' faces contorted with madness, advanced with unholy zeal, their bodies twisted by the touch of the warp. The temperature in the room plummeted, breath turning to mist as an unseen force pressed against them. The cultists, their bodies writhing in unnatural convulsions, did not stop their chanting. Some of them bled from their eyes, their skin splitting as something beyond comprehension clawed its way through the veil. The very air rippled, thick with an oppressive weight, as if the walls themselves were straining to contain the entity that sought passage. A battle of wills ensued as Ravenna confronted the warp-spawned abominations. Bolter rounds tore through the twisted entities, banishing them back to the immaterial realm. But the cultists' malevolent chants persisted, threatening to ensnare the Inquisitor's mind in the suffocating grip of the warp.
Ravenna!
The acolyte shouted, his voice breaking through the din.
You're calling something! Something immense!
Then we silence them.
Ravenna snapped, her voice like steel.
Their words are the key to this madness.
As Ravenna fought to maintain her sanity, her acolyte, overwhelmed by the psychic onslaught, fell to his knees, clutching his head in torment. The Inquisitor's determination wavered, but with a surge of indomitable will, she pressed on, her psychic resilience a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. The cult's leader, a figure shrouded in a tattered cloak, stepped forward. His voice resonated with unnatural sonority as he spoke of forbidden knowledge and the inevitability of chaos consuming the Imperium. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around him as he invoked the power of the warp.
We are the heralds, and the galaxy shall burn,
the leader hissed, his voice like nails on glass. Ravenna, fueled by righteous fury, confronted the cult leader in a psychic duel that transcended the material realm. The air crackled with unseen energies as the Inquisitor fought to banish the warp-touched presence. The cult leader's voice echoed in her mind, low and mocking, as if it resonated from the very warp itself.
You think you can stop us, Inquisitor? You who cling to your Emperor's lies, believing them to be salvation. The Imperium you serve is a rotting corpse, a crumbling monument built on fear and blind faith. The truth lies in the warp, the only true reality. Do you not see? This galaxy, this empire, is already dead, and all you do is delay the inevitable. You fight for a corpse king, Inquisitor, and in the end, even you will see the truth.
The cult leader's words did not merely reach Ravenna's ears. They slithered into her mind, a venomous whisper that sought to take root. For the briefest moment, she felt something claw at the edges of her thoughts, twisting her perception. She saw the Imperium not as the monolithic bulwark of humanity, but as a crumbling ruin, propped up by superstition and fear. The doubt was fleeting, burned away by sheer will, but the fact that it had been there at all made her grip tighten around her weapon. He smiled through the chaos, his eyes glowing with unnatural light as tendrils of warp energy writhed around him, distorting the very fabric of space.
You are nothing but a servant of a decaying order. The Emperor's light is but a flicker against the eternity of the warp. You cannot save what is already lost, and when the darkness consumes you, you will understand. There is no victory against it, only the eventual surrender.
With a final incantation, she shattered the cult leader's psychic defenses, sending a shockwave that reverberated through the warp. As the cultist fell, the acolyte stumbled to his feet, shaken but alive.
What now, Inquisitor?
He asked, his voice hoarse.
Now?
Ravenna replied, her gaze fixed on the fading shadows.
We go higher. The true enemy sits not in the dirt, but near the golden throne of power.
The chamber fell silent, the cultists defeated, and the warp energies dissipated like shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a voxcaster crackled to life. A distorted voice murmured fragmented phrases in a tongue that was neither High Gothic nor any known dialect of the Administratum. The sound sent an involuntary shudder down the acolyte's spine. It was not a message. It was a repetition, a phrase spoken again and again, as if something long forgotten was trying to be remembered. Ravenna, battered but unbroken, stood amidst the remnants of her struggle.
Adela, do you ever wonder if we're fighting the wrong war?
The acolyte asked, his voice trembling as they regrouped in the aftermath of the battle. Ravenna shot him a sharp glance.
We fight the war we must. Doubt is the first step toward corruption.
But this corruption, it's everywhere.
He persisted, his eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting them to come alive.
Even in the Administratum, even in those who claim to serve the Emperor. How can we purge it all? Is it even possible?
Ravenna's gaze softened slightly, though her tone remained resolute.
Our task is not to succeed, but to endure. Faith is not about victory. It is about standing firm, no matter how hopeless it seems.
She stepped closer, lowering her voice.
Remember this, acolyte. It is better to die in service to the Emperor than to live under the shadow of heresy.
As they ascended the winding stairs back toward the surface, the acolyte broke the silence again.
Do you think they're right?
He asked hesitantly. Ravenna halted, her voice low but firm.
What if chaos is inevitable? What if we're just delaying the fall?
Her expression darkened, her voice sharpened.
Chaos thrives on doubt. It whispers lies and twists fear into acceptance. If you let it take root, I will have to purge it myself.
The acolyte swallowed hard, nodding.
I understand, Inquisitor.
Good. Now let's finish this.
Ravenna replied.
We bring these truths to light no matter the cost.
As Ravenna and the acolyte continued their ascent, the weight of their conversation lingered in the air. The acolyte's face, once filled with doubt, now seemed to carry a subtle change. His eyes darted to the shadows around them, and for a moment, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curled at the corner of his lips. He quickly wiped it away, his expression returning to one of resolve. As they climbed, the light of the hive city grew stronger, yet the weight in Ravenna's chest did not ease. Her acolyte walked beside her, his expression neutral, his hands steady. And yet, something was different. The way he carried himself, the way his eyes lingered in the dark corners of the stairwell, watching something that was not there. She said nothing, not yet, but she had seen it before. The first seed of corruption rarely screamed, it whispered. But for a fleeting second, Ravenna noticed the shift in his demeanor. She glanced over, but he had already masked it, his features hardened once again. The thought passed her, unspoken, but it lingered like a quiet shadow in her mind. Could the darkness have already begun to claim him? Ravenna, focused on their surroundings, did not notice the shift in his demeanor. She was consumed by the weight of her thoughts, her mind set on the task ahead.
There is no time for weakness, and there's no end to this struggle,
she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the echo of their steps.
Only an endless sequence of victories that are nothing more than delays.
She paused for a moment, gripping the hilt of her bolter tightly.
But that's why we exist, isn't it?
She continued, her tone firm despite the shadows in her eyes.
Not to win, but to make sure the darkness never wins completely.
As she emerged from the depths of Secundus Siderax, the weight of her discoveries pressed upon Ravenna's shoulders. The Inquisition, meant to safeguard the Imperium, was entwined in a web of corruption and heresy. The labyrinth of deceit extended far beyond Secundus Siderax, reaching into the very heart of the Imperium.